welcome to Broadway Buzz, and welcome to Tina, the Tina Turner musical. Well, and are you in for a treat? The show is absolutely spectacular. Everything you've heard about it isn't enough, it's even more. So you're in for a great treat. Keep in mind, Tina Turner was a major star for 6 decades. I mean, first of all, she was the queen of rhythm and blues, and then she became, at age 40, the queen of rock and roll. And remember, rock and roll in that period was really, you had to be very, very young. If you were over 25, you were over the hill. And this was the period where young white boys were singing young black boys' music. But in any case, Tina Turner would come along and captivate the crown, and she literally would be a superstar in the major capitals of the world. It's probably the greatest success story that's ever happened in the music industry. So let's go back to the beginning and see how all this happened. The time is 1939. The place is Nutbush, Tennessee, and young Anna Mae Bullock is born into a rather dysfunctional family. Her father is a sharecropper, so at a very early age, Anna Mae would pick cotton, but then he was also a minister and greatly revered in the little backwater community where they lived. However, at home, he brutally beat his wife. Not a very good attribute for a minister. But so in any case, Anna Mae's mother and sister would leave the family. So at a very early age, Anna Mae was literally abandoned by her mother and the beloved sister that was her idol. Several years later, her father, who was very unkind, looked her in the face and said, "I don't see me in you," and he left her. So, I mean, this is a child abandoned by both parents before she's 12 years old. She's raised by a very strict Baptist grandmother, and of course, her grandmother gave her, one, a sense of love, but much more importantly, gave her music. And by taking her to the Baptist services, of course, we had the great gospel music, and Anna Mae would blossom and sing full voice. When she'd come home from church, her grandmother would spank her sometimes and say, "Anna Mae, you can't sing like that. You're singing louder than anyone else." And the young child would say, "Well, tell everyone else to sing louder," And that was, so there was no way that our beloved Tina Turner would ever blend in. And so this was true even as a child. Watch those early scenes in the musical. The young girl who plays Anna Mae is absolutely extraordinary. And I think we can see the next Tina Turner in the making. But she has this energy and joy and vitality and big voice for a little girl. And it's really quite extraordinary. So in Anna Mae's childhood then, a white family sort of took her in, the Hendersons. And that family used her as a domestic, and she cleaned in the house, and she also took care she was a nanny and took care of the children. But the Hendersons gave her the first real sense of family and gave her the first real sense of growing up in a house with niceties like manners and good conversation and proper speech and learning how to write well. All of these things Anna Mae would devour, and it would serve her well the rest of her life. She would ultimately, of course, after she became Tina Turner, would write a brilliant biography called I, Tina. And I, Tina would go to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. So this is no little tell-all music biography. Rather, it is a very important work about a woman coming of age, not only as a great artist, but also as she would find herself philosophically, intellectually, spiritually. It's an extraordinary book and is the basis for the musical. Many of you know that a movie was then created called What's Love Got to Do with It, with Angela Bassett, and it's also an extraordinary account of Tina Turner's life. It's a much more graphic account in that it shows all of the violence that was so much a part of her life. Okay, so she's now 16 years old. Her grandmother dies. She goes off to live with her mother and sister, finally, in St. Louis. And her sister will take her over. And I mean, keep in mind, Anna Mae is this little country bumpkin. I mean, she came from a town with like 120 people. And suddenly, for her, she's in this wonderful city, St. Louis, where she's going to be able to hear real music. And her sister takes her to hear Ike Turner and his Kings of Rhythm. And this, of course, will change Anna Mae's life. She will go to work for Ike Turner. She's called Little Anna in the group. Ultimately, Ike Turner realizes what an extraordinarily gifted young woman she really is. And Ike Turner had always had this very paranoid reaction to other people he worked with. He helped other people find great music, and they'd get a hit song, and then they would leave him. And so Ike Turner always felt abandoned. So to prevent this from happening with young Anna, he very quickly married her, so she would become, it would be Ike and Tina Turner, and that would be the review. And he would literally make her a superstar. Even though she had this great, incredible natural talent and this voice that never seems to have a bottom or top, an extraordinary range, and she knows, and he taught her how to use that voice and develop stage presence, etc. He also dressed her, gave her her look. Keep in mind, very early on, Ike Turner was very enamored of a television show. It was sort of a cheesy television show in the 50s called China, Queen of the Jungle. But if you remember that, I do, if you remember that, she used to wear these little short miniskirts that were cut off with sort of rags hanging around and swing on vines. I mean, poor Ozzie and Harriet raised their eyebrows at the sight of such an event. But this would be the look that Tina Turner would take on for the rest of her career, the really short skirts. And then early on, Ike Turner said, I really want you to be a blonde. So she went off to have her hair dyed, and all of her hair fell out. And so as a result of that, Tina Turner had to start wearing wigs. But not only did she buy wigs, she shaped them and created a very special and unique look that nobody else had by the way she would cut the wig. And so, you know, it ended up, I mean, the great icon that we know, Tina Turner was wearing big wigs, even bigger than Dolly Parton's, if such a thing was possible. But in any case, always fashioned in this very unique and special Tina Turner look. So it was Ike Turner who would give her the look of the hair, the look of the short skirt. She would capitalize on the great legs, and of course, they capitalized on that extraordinary voice and musical presence that she would have. So Ike Turner did a great deal to make Tina Turner. However, he was also an incredibly destructive force in her life. From very early on in their marriage, he started seriously beating her. She would have a broken nose, a broken jaw. When you look at these old video clips that you see when they were on American Bandstand or the Ed Sullivan Show, you could see that she was always wearing very heavy makeup to hide all of the bruising and the black eyes and the brutality that was part of this absolutely ridiculous life she had with Ike Turner. And this would go on for 16 years. I mean, two things are going on. When you watch the first act, the whole first act is about Anna Mae becoming Tina Turner and Ike and Tina Turner. That's Act One. And it will end with a brutal divorce. Keep in mind, at that point, Anna Mae would run away fearing for her life and had only 36 cents to her name. It was a very desperate time. So we have, the first act really has an extraordinary dichotomy, because on one hand, we're watching this young girl live an American dream, the young girl who wants to be the great singer, and she becomes the great singer right in front of our eyes. And we keep seeing her develop and getting better and better and more sophisticated and having more stage presence and learning how to sell a song and learning how to use her body, all these extraordinary things that we so love about Tina Turner. So on one hand, we're watching this very joyously, but on the other hand, we're watching this brutality that's going on, where ultimately she literally fears for her life. Okay, so Act One is an extraordinary vehicle, wonderfully done with great music. Watch especially, there's a scene with an agent called Phil Spector. And Phil Spector was famous for creating, when he recorded music, he would pick artists and turn them into superstars, incidentally. But he would use what he called a wall of sound, which means that there's an incredible electronic sound behind the singer. So you have to have a singer who has a voice that can cut through that sound. And that's what Tina Turner had. So you'll see the development of one of her greatest songs, River Deep, Mountain High, and you watch the recording of that, and you see the importance of a powerful agent who's able to really shape an artist, giving her brilliant material and then helping her really cut the mustard with that material. So Act One is an extraordinary work, and we follow it with the greatest interest. Act Two, then, will be about the sort of phoenix rising. Because of the divorce, she's absolutely at the bottom of her life. I mean, both emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. She's bereft after this horrific ordeal with Ike Turner. And then remember, she also has this childhood of being abandoned by both of her parents. Happily, through this period, she found Buddhism, and Buddhism would transform her life. Tina Turner very wonderfully talks about it in her biography, and she says, "I'm the only Baptist Buddhist that I know." But it served her so that she didn't spend her life as a victim. Rather, she spent her life as a survivor. And Act Two, then, will be about coming from this absolute bottom of her life and then moving to this great triumph that will, make her the internationally famous Tina Turner superstar. There's something about the divorce that isn't really developed in the musical. It is in the biography, and it certainly is in the movie. But I just want to take a few moments to help you realize how stripped she really was by the time the second act begins. In the court hearing, Ike Turner had controlled everything. Tina Turner never got paid in all of their relationship together. She would watch everybody else, all the backup singers, all the musicians getting paid. She never got paid, ever. So there was never any money. She never had anything. And Ike Turner kept it that way. But even more desperate than that, he owned all of the copyrights on all of the music, even music that she wrote. So when they divorced, she didn't have the rights to sing any of the songs that made her famous. He kept her wigs, he kept her jewelry, he kept her clothes, he kept her cars. They were, very successful in this period, and she was literally left with nothing. What he did give her, he gave her 2 of his children from a previous marriage to raise. He gave her their child that they sired together to raise. And then Tina Turner had another child with a saxophone player. So she had 4 young boys to raise at the beginning of the second act, when she literally has nothing. The only thing Ike Turner gave her, he gave her 1 week's free rent. That was it. And the judge was so horrified by all of this. He also, Ike Turner, tried to keep her name. He said, that he had copyrighted the name, and it was his name, and she could not use it. Tina Turner. And the judge finally said, "This is the most revolting case I have ever presided over. You are giving this woman her name or I'm going to put you in jail." And Ike Turner's response was, "Why is everyone making such a big deal about me beating up on my wife? Everybody does it." I mean, really sad. He came from his own tragic family background, and it was just sort of, all of this bad stuff being passed on through generations. It was very sad. People believe now that Ike Turner, even though he was a genius, probably was bipolar and had a lot of emotional problems. So, not that it excuses it, but nevertheless it explains it. Okay, so you then see this extraordinary second act where she reaches the state of triumph. Okay, so let us talk then about the idea of jukebox musicals. A jukebox musical means that you take pre-existing music and use it to tell the story. In this case, we want to tell the story of Tina Turner's life. We have a brilliant autobiography to draw from. We have a great movie to draw from. And then actually Tina Turner participated in the creation of the script, so we literally had the artist to contribute to the telling of the story. And then, of course, they used the catalog of all of her great music. And that's the formula of a jukebox musical. You know that since the 1950s, this has become the most successful part of the musical theater, and that without jukebox musicals, we would not have a vital Broadway or a vital West End, or groups performing these musicals literally in every theater capital of the world. So jukebox musicals have very significantly moved the musical forward. However, the New York critics love to hate jukebox musicals. So happily for the Tina Turner musical, it was developed in England and first produced in England. So the English critics are not concerned about jukebox musicals or the legitimacy of it. They just accept it as part of the art form. And it received rave reviews. And so by the time it came to America, it was almost critic-proof. But just let me show you what the critics did in New York. The Wall Street Journal, a very distinguished critic, on opening night wrote, "I am sorry to tell you, but the Tina Turner musical is a great hit." He would go on to say, "But it's a jukebox musical," and we know how terrible they are. I mean, they're taking pre-existing music and they're contriving storylines. I mean, jukebox musicals have been spectacular. Some of the greatest staging, some of the greatest choreography, some of the greatest performances, some of the greatest scripts have come out of jukebox musicals. And this was also true with the New York Times. I mean, Jess Green, who's the major critic for the New York Times, also has spent a whole career putting down jukebox musicals. And I keep writing to him every time he does it. I think we've become pen pals over the years with this. But in any case, he too, even though Jess Green said, well, it's a spectacular show, it has a star-making role, the Tina Turner role. The music is extraordinary, the choreography is great, the direction's great, but it is a jukebox musical. And he discredits it. And this is very unfair. And I want to look at this for you and just show you what this script really has and how it really functions as a jukebox musical. But before I do this, I just want to show you what a true theater nerd I am. I am the only person who knows that the first jukebox musical happened in 1788. Okay, and it was The Beggar's Opera, and it was a little melodramatic story, and they plagiarized all of the great songs from the operettas of the day, and they put this all together as a musical confection, as a kind of musical entertainment. It was the first long-running show in London. It ran for 6 months. Everyone loved The Beggar's Opera. 200 years later, Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill would take that story of the Beggar's Opera and turn it into three-penny opera, but the critics were all happy to know that finally there was legitimate theater music for it. So that really is the first jukebox musical. In 1888, in New York, another quick example for you, there was a theater owner who had two theaters. In one, he was presenting a little melodrama called The Black Crook, and it was about a saloon musical, with drunken people playing cards, fist fights, throwing tables through windows. We know that story. On the other hand, in his other theater, he had 50 French can-can dancers. And when the reviews came out, the critics said, this is a high Victorian period in New York, and they said, we can see the ladies' ankles. In fact, we can see the ladies' thighs. So of course, it sold out, right? So it was a great hit. Okay, so one of his theaters burned, and suddenly he has two long-term contracts for 50 hysterical French can-can dancers and this cast of old cowboys. So he puts them together, and it's called The Black Crook, and that is the first American jukebox musical. Again, it would break box office records and have, for its time, a very long run in New York. I think it was 7.5 months. So again, that formula has been lurking around for centuries. And then finally, by the late 1950s, we started using it regularly when we created musicals about groups, musicals about solo performers like Donna Summer or Cher or Carole King, and we have this whole body of great jukebox musicals. Okay, so let me show you exactly then what happens with this particular jukebox musicals and what the critics missed about it. Okay, so first of all, we have to go to 2016, and we're in Amsterdam, and we're looking at stage entertainment. Stage entertainment is a licensing group, and they take musicals that have happened in New York or in London, they translate them into Japanese or Hungarian or German or whatever, and they present it literally around the world. It's a licensing company, as it's called. And they have a lot of money because major capitals of the world, from Singapore to Sydney, now have long-running musicals. With the coming of Andrew Lloyd Webber, with the coming of the great producer Cameron Mackintosh, with the coming of the mega musicals, we started presenting these entertainments literally everywhere in the world, and this licensing house is one of the major distributors. So they put up a lot of money for a one-year workshop, unheard of, to develop the new musical Tina in 2016. They even got Tina Turner involved in the process. She said, I really don't want to have anything to do with this. This is about my past. I'm very anxious to be living my life as it is now, but somehow the right people talked her into doing it, thank goodness, because she contributed very significantly to the making of this great musical. We also have the autobiography, and then we also have the film to work with, and then, of course, we have the firsthand input with Tina Turner. They then hire a wonderful young African-American book writer. Her name is Katori Hall. We know her as she wrote a brilliant play about Martin Luther King, about his last day on earth. It's called Mountaintop. It's an extraordinary work. And so she's a great writer, a great playwright. And also, she was born in Memphis, Tennessee, so she understands the idiom that Tina Turner grew up in, and also being an African-American woman, she understood, the journey that Tina Turner had to make in that regard. So she was the perfect choice to create the storyline for the Tina musical. But more importantly, I want you to be aware of Phyllida Lloyd, who is the female director of this show. She was the original director of Mamma Mia, and as you remember, that was one of the first jukebox musicals. It was based on the music of ABBA, but it was a story of a young girl finding out who her real father is. It was so successful that it would run for 10 years in New York, 10 years in London, 2 films have been made. A 3rd film is in the process of being made. They've just signed Meryl Streep to do it again. So Phyllida Lloyd really was the first great director to make the jukebox musical really legitimate. So critics could no longer just dismiss it. How do you dismiss a show that plays to standing room only for 10 years? I mean, you can't. So even they had to admit that there is some substance to jukebox musicals. So Phyllida Lloyd will take all of the people she used in Mamma Mia, the projectionists, the lighting designers, et cetera, and work with them again in the creation of Tina. But much more important about Phyllida Lloyd, I followed her work in the 1970s, 80s in England when she was directing in British regional theater. And she was directing Shakespeare. So, I mean, again, it was very unheard of for a first of all, there weren't many female directors to begin with. So she's one of the first great female directors, and then she's directing the great works of Shakespeare in England, and she starts doing it in the regions, but the productions start becoming so famous that they're talked about literally all over the world in theater circles. She will find her way to the West End in London, be asked to direct at the Royal Shakespeare Company, be asked to direct at the National Theatre of Great Britain, so she becomes a preeminent director. But the important thing is she understands how to do Shakespearean works. And in a way, I want you to realize that what you're seeing is sort of, the story is told in a sort of Shakespearean format. Shakespeare wrote so that there were many plots and subplots, that there's a constant passage of time, and that one of the great tricks in pulling off a Shakespearean work is you've got to keep the focus on Hamlet, or you've got to keep the focus on Macbeth, so that you can carry the story, take the audience through the whole storyline. And in the same way, you have, a very interesting villain in this show, Ike Turner, and you have lots of very interesting minor characters. So you've got to make certain that the focus stays on Tina Turner as we move through this epic. And keep in mind, in this show, the actress playing Tina Turner has to sing 26 songs, unheard of. And it takes 2 actresses to play the role, each play 4 performances a week. I saw the show in London and New York, and I've seen many of the, they're really not understudies, they're jointly cast. All of these women are extraordinary. This all has to do with what Phyllida Lloyd does and how she shapes these actors to have the stamina and skill to move through this epic sort of treatment. So what I want you to be aware of is, let's look at the opening of the show. Not one critic, I went back and looked at all the reviews, no one talked about this, but the opening of the show I call a prologue, in the same way that Shakespeare would write prologues. You see Tina Turner as the superstar. She's on her knees with her back to the audience with the big hair and the glittery skirt, and she's at the foot of a huge staircase, and she's chanting in her Buddhist chants. And in that opening, you see all of the people of her life, her childhood, Anna May, her grandmother, Ike Turner, the agents, the man she will ultimately marry. All of these people move through this sort of memory sequence while she's chanting. This is an outrageous way to start a musical. It's the way Shakespeare would start a great play, with a prologue. What we don't know in the text, but we learn by the end of the show, is what that moment is 1988, the place is Rio, and Tina Turner is about to go on stage in front of 120,000 paying people, the largest audience ever, and that is the prologue. So literally what we're setting up, what Katori Hall sets up, is really a memory play where we move into Tina Turner's mind. You will see this device play out several times through the story, just as Shakespeare would do that. Probably the most important thing that I want you to look at is how Philida Lloyd uses music. So, for example, at the beginning of the second act, we have, one of Tina Turner's greatest songs called Private Dancer. It was one of her greatest hits. It's a very, very dark song. And again, Tina Turner is very at the bottom of her life when she sings that song. But again, it's staged in a very abstracted way. And literally, we're seeing this woman struggle, trying to find how is she going to support her children, how is she going to reinvent her life, etc. So that song, Philida Lloyd uses, she keeps stopping the song, one of the greatest songs Tina Turner ever sang. They keep stopping it and having dialogue. It's like it's a soliloquy in Shakespeare. In Shakespeare, when you want to go into the character's mind, we have this soliloquy, and they present it to the audience. And that's what the opening of the second act does with that song, with that brilliant song. So that literally we're moving into Tina Turner's mind, and we're seeing all of the chaos, all of the uncertainty, all of the pain she's going through and trying to recreate her life. Philida Lloyd will use music like that several times so that it really is like a series of soliloquies. And then at the end of the show, we have this epilogue where we see that same scene that we saw at the beginning of the show with Tina Turner on her knees. And finally, though, this time she goes up the stairs and we literally see her perform at that great concert. And we have some of the 17 greatest minutes we have in theater. It's spectacular. And so do not leave when you think the curtain call is happening. So please enjoy Tina, the Tina Turner musical.